Mute. Hello, good evening, everybody. How are you doing? I know it's
Doing
hard when
great.
there's like many of you on call. It's nice to be here. And
Thanks
sorry,
for joining
please
us,
continue.
Rachel. Yeah, appreciate you joining us with short notice, knowing your schedule is rather full and busy all the time. Your 24 hours are always filled.
Yes, and I want to apologize both for my children who are in the background for interrupting, as well as for missing the last call altogether. Life sometimes interjects in strange ways, and we've had a very, very ill cat for the last 8 weeks. It was a family member, and we had to put her down. And I don't know if any of you have ever had that experience of having to say goodbye to a beloved family member, but our lives were very full with supporting her in that transition, and everything else just dropped. And I'm really sorry for letting you all down. Truly, I'm now picking up the pieces, basically. So I'm very grateful to have this opportunity to talk with all of you tonight.
Thank you, Rachel. Yeah, the unconditional love of a pet is as precious as life ever gets. Really special. So, Madeline, why don't you just start us off to dive in and launch the session, please?
Absolutely. Does everybody have their water with them today? Awesome. I guess I didn't really have a water blessing prepared, but water is a beautiful thing, and it's so great that it has, brought people all over the world together, and it's brought us together for this time as well. And we are so excited to be here with you tonight and be finishing out the program with all of you. So cheers to that.
Cheers.
And Rachel, if you wanted to just start by sort of giving an introduction into the work that you've done, and then I know you had a video to share with us and some other information about and stories about the role that you've played really creating community and water and environmental advocacy.
Yes, so I'd be happy to do that. So I guess, just to start, because I'm assuming, just to get a lay of the land, that all of you are either in college or getting a master's degree or in some higher education. Is that right? Okay, so just as context, back, it feels like that was not that long ago. And then I remember that my cat was 17 when she died. And I got her in my 30s. So when I was in college, I studied history and anthropology, and I didn't know what I wanted to do or who I wanted to be. And so I basically was inspired by the way that Europeans take gap years, and I saved up money and I started traveling, and I wound up spending about 2 years traveling through Southern Europe and the Near East and into Eastern and Southern Africa. And I journaled heavily during that period. I was kind of independently backpacking and, meeting people and then leaving people and then going somewhere else, and as the day takes you. But all throughout, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to focus on. And, in my head, it was very much this binary sort of thing of, do I want to be a lawyer? Do I want to be a journalist? Do I want to be a lawyer? Do I want to go into business? Do I want to be a lawyer? And I realized that actually I really wanted to focus on water. And I wasn't going to kind of let the label of the education define what I was going to do. And what interested me about water was how important it is, not just in terms of like social issues. So, living on a kibbutz for a few months in Israel and seeing the differences between the like Palestinian village or mostly Israeli Arab village, and then the kibbutz, which reused a lot of water, but then also the really, really nice houses in the Palestinian village up on the hill that had crazy, beautiful gardens too. So it's not just like everything is messy, right? Or in Africa, where you see the women with the buckets of water on their head and the kids down in the stream, washing clothing in the same water that the animals are in, and just kind of all of those experiences that you see along the way. And I was reminded of my own childhood growing up on the East End of Long Island in a very it was a working class town when I was growing up there, but it's become part of the Hamptons. And my town, this historic town had 3 Superfund sites when I was growing up, and a little cancer corridor. And, the Manhattanites that would come out didn't know that necessarily, but, there were environmental issues where I came from too. And so I decided to sort of steer my career toward water, and then, you know, suddenly soon realized that I actually had to have a skill to be involved in water. And so with my history and anthropology background, I went back to school for policy. And in a way that opened up a whole lot of like being a generalist. So I studied, I have a master's of public administration, and I took a lot of business school classes. All of my electives were business school to learn about financing, in part because I kind of had this feeling that the way that these systems get funded actually contribute to some of the water insecurity that that communities experience. And so that felt very like something I wanted to learn more about. And so over the course of my career, I would say, you know, I'm known as being a finance expert, but in a funny way. Like, so if you maybe, you know, Google my name, you'll see like, oh, I've written all these papers on water and finance and innovative finance mechanisms. And, you know, I helped co-found the water and sanitation program at the Gates Foundation, all about philanthropy financing. But in many respects, I'm a generalist who happened to see that nobody was talking about financing at the time and kind of stepped into that space. And, you know, there was then a group of us that were really committed to these questions about, well, why is there a funding gap? You know, and it can't just be that we need more money. There has to be something, you know, underneath that. And so having some finance skills, then quickly becoming a governance expert, which then quickly became, you know, understanding the organizations and the institutions that are all involved in delivering water to people, or planning for water resources management, or running a business, or running a nonprofit. So, you know, I'm really kind of a generalist in that space, and I've been very privileged to be able to participate in a whole variety of different things across my career. I will say that 20 years ago when I got started, the whole sustainability space it was really at the beginning. So most of the things that I've done professionally, I've kind of been novel in that role, or it's like a new role, a new job that hasn't been created. And I think, you know, part of my responsibility and our responsibility is to always create more space for others. And so one of the key things, and I'm going to lead up to my video, is this realization over the last several years as a consultant. I've had my own consulting firm. I've also worked for Environmental Resources Management, which is a leading environmental consultancy. And one of the things that always bothered me, two things. One, you know, I made a very intentional choice after backpacking for 2 years. It took me that long to figure out I wanted to really focus on water. But I really intentionally didn't want to be an expat. And I didn't want to like go and be the white woman going to God knows where, right? Like some other country, as much and as wonderful as that sounds. And honestly, everybody, when I was starting in my 30s, when people were like, oh, are you going to have a family or whatever? Everybody told me, now's the time to be an expat because you'll have, you know, a housekeeper and a cook and a nanny and it'll all be really cheap. And I was like, isn't there something wrong there? That doesn't resonate with who I am. It didn't feel right. So I was not really that interested in the expat thing. I'm not dissing it for anybody of you who are interested in it, but it wasn't right for me. But there was this other piece then, that being based in the US, I often get called to go and advise organizations, you know, development finance institutions and multilateral organizations and large NGOs and whatever. I often get called to advise them. And that means me flying to this or that country, right? In sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, the Caribbean, to go and do strategy work and basically ask some basic questions. So I was really excited a couple of years ago when the Hilton Foundation, which is a large philanthropy focused on water. I'm currently at Stanford. I'm wearing my Stanford jacket. They asked us to help train their grantees who are operating in country to do better proposal writing, because they wanted to create more opportunities for local organizations to access funding from this philanthropy that's in the US. And I am so on board with that. I was one of the first people at the Gates Foundation to make grants to local organizations in countries rather than have them route through an intermediary. I really in my whole heart believe that it's That's really important to decolonize aid. I used to call it democratizing aid rather than decolonizing it, but that's effectively what we're trying to do. And so we basically said, you know what, hey, Hilton, what if we actually trained professionals to become strategy coaches who understand, they're already seasoned professionals, but we'll teach them how to use the words and the language and the skill sets that are what people like the Hilton Foundation want to see in a proposal. And that way you can hire them, and you don't have to hire us to go and do a training in Ghana, Uganda, Ethiopia. You can actually hire locals to like work, and do this work. And they'll have the Stanford seal of approval. So that trust issue and accountability, it will be covered. And so we've just completed in January of this year, we trained 19 coaches in Ghana, Uganda, and Ethiopia. 2 of our coaches have roots in Kenya. And I hired a team, 1 Ghanaian and 1 Ugandan, Diana and Gertrude, to actually train a team in Sierra Leone who works with the Ministry of Water Resources there at the head of monitoring and evaluation for Sierra Leone, to actually use problem solving skills. And some of you who might be, you might be like, well, gosh, that's not rocket science. It's not rocket science. It's basic lean thinking combined with storytelling, combined with being, sort of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion thinking. And we've created this whole community that's really a truly global community where we're actually learning and sharing how do you navigate identifying a problem, identifying root causes, coming up with a clear objective, and developing a work plan. And how do you iterate and experiment and build that real boring kind of stuff that really can help drive programs to be successful. It was a really successful program. I'm going to share a video that's not my voice about it. But we're currently really excited to see it kind of moving on its own, where our coaches are already, using the skills and getting new business. And we've created this kind of global community to surround them. So I even have 2 colleagues who are leading a workshop on Thursday of this week with new curriculum on conflict, on not avoiding conflict, but how do you navigate conflict resolution with this wider community that we have. So it's a super exciting program. And it's one of these interesting things because it's not actually, I'm going to share my screen. It's not actually specifically about water. A lot of the programming relates to water. I designed a simulation that's all about water, but really what it's about is critical thinking. And hang on, for some reason, it's not sharing. I want to share the Google, this one. So hang on a second, let me pause. I have way too many windows open. So I'm going to show this video, and then I would welcome, I know it's really meant as a little bit of a free thing. I've worked in academia, I've worked for the private sector, I've worked for the development community. I'm really happy to share stories or answer questions that you might have as you embark on your journey and your career path in the water sector. But now, I don't know why. Can you see the Vimeo, or do you see a map of Africa right now?
Right now, it's just a black screen, but it says that we're viewing your screen. So it's there.
Really weird. So I'm here, I'm just trying to, I'm unfortunately, I'm doing this. So how about this now? Can you see this now? The STAR training program? Okay, so I'm going to play the video. It's a few minutes long, but I hope you enjoy it.
In this course, the idea of coaching is perfect because as a trainer, to journey with the participants and be with them and see them grow is so powerful.
We all face problems. What really impresses from the STAR program is the way we solve the problems.
I was wondering how they were going to navigate this whole program online. I felt there may be hitches, but it was very seamless.
I'll be working with women who has been having a problem around finding time to pursue higher education. They are mothers, at the same time housewives. Mainly in STAR training, we are guiding them towards identifying those root causes to be addressed so as to solve the problem. We do not go for quick fixes. So I've selected the fishbone tool because it offers a multi-dimensional approach to look at the different reasons they are unable to pursue higher education here in Kampala, Uganda.
I currently work as a development consultant based in Accra, Ghana. We work in capacity building for institutions.
Once they introduced the STAR training to us, we were interested to get acquainted with more tools that will help the work that we do. Lean thinking stood out to me the most. It's helped me to see how I can add value to my work, how to work efficiently.
STAR tools can help government agencies to identify the root cause of a problem.
So the officials in the Sutifi North, they had an issue of not getting the right caliber of staff to attend planning meetings at the assembly. And we used two tools to help them. We started with a stakeholder diagram, and then we used the fishbone diagram to delve deeper into the root cause of the issue.
I and Andernets have initiated a business focused mainly on urban agriculture in Addis Ababa. In this business, we face lots of challenges. We have a shortage of land resources. Everybody is living at apartments. We have water supply problem.
We have water on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. And the other days we don't have water. And to manage this water deficit, we will store water with all available buckets.
At the beginning, we have thought that it would be easy to make it happen. In the middle of the process, actually, what we understood is we need to deal with lots of stakeholders. We are thinking to use the business canvas model of the STAR program that really analyzes what our stakeholders are, what value do we propose for them. Well, we have stakeholders, propose the value, and then the relationship.
Yes. What are the costs and possible risks we may face during this process?
There is a wealth that we get from slowing down and listening. As a coach, I have learned to be patient, to work with people to the root cause.
Mainly what I've learned from the instruction team is their dedication to transfer knowledge and to coach trainers.
I learned tolerance and how to accommodate everybody's perspective.
I used to think twice before speaking. So I really learned from them just to say it out so that you get validated.
So for potential STAR trainees, you would be equipped with a toolbox for problem solving in the development space.
So I wanted to share that with you. Hang on, now let me turn that off as we, so I wanted to share that video with you from a couple of perspectives. You know, one, I really believe in the program. You know, it was kind of my life for the past year, was really working with colleagues who have become family, you know, around the world, and creating this community in a truly 100% virtual environment. And so we did a lot of work Zoom based, but but also, you know, some of the things that I think, you know, the highlights for me in the video included just this idea of, for example, you know, Gertrude gives an example of, oh, we worked with a government in Asutifi North, she mentions, and the problem was that they couldn't get senior people to show up to the meetings. That doesn't seem like a water sector problem, but it was the water sector team in the local government, in a district, a county in Ghana, right, that's receiving a lot of money from the Hilton Foundation. And so sometimes it's, you know, there's a saying, right, it's not, you know, it's not the journey of the hike that stops you from summiting the mountain, it's the pebble in your shoe. And, you know, it's, so sometimes the pebbles in our shoes are things like, I can't get my boss to show up to the meeting, or, you know, why is this not happening in the timing that it needs to happen? Why do I get the budget data after my budget proposal is due? You know, like, so it's sort of those sorts of things to try and alleviate some of the problems, the systemic problems that limit our ability to, you know, and limit our ability as a collective world, right, to make sure that people have their human right to water. So I'm going to pause there. Obviously, there's a lot of things we could talk about. I'm eager to learn about you as well. So I'm wondering, you know, if raise your hand if you have any questions or thoughts, if any of that resonated with any of you. And if you do, I'd just love you to, if you could share a little bit, maybe, you know, a little bit about what you're passionate about, what brings you to water would be really helpful.
Okay, I guess I don't really have time. I don't have a very specific question in mind, but something you had mentioned with what kind of led you to finance was saying that projects for water were having issues where it was sort of making the problem more persistent was not being able to have access to funding, whether it's like sort of the mechanisms and not necessarily the money isn't there. So part of my research is water and sanitation in Alaska, and for state funding to put in a pipe system, one of the things, they have to like meet the criteria and get a score, but in order to get that score, you actually need everything that a pipe system provides. So it's kind of an example of where I've seen that in my I'm an undergrad student, but I'm a senior, and so just in sort of that limited scope, that's what I've seen. So I don't know, this is, I guess, too general of a question, but just sort of what you have seen communities do successfully to overcome barriers to funding like that.
Yeah, so I mean, so one of the things is like the barriers to finance are very real. I think, you know, so not to say that there's no challenges with funding. I think, oh, sorry, Stuart.
He's in the airport right now. I think he unmuted on accident.
Oh God, yeah, no, right, like #life. So one of the things that, you know, so I would say, right, so something like in Alaska where you have to meet these criteria for piped water systems, and yet piped water systems are massively capital intensive. So how is a community going, like, this is the backwards function. There are other ways to meet those things. So to me, that's a budget problem. It's a funding problem, but very quickly it's a regulatory problem, right? So why are these maybe remote communities required to have the same standards as a city, right? When the cost and the debt associated with providing piped water systems to a community might be beyond what the community can bear. And I think so part of it is, you know, like, you know, for example, like my experience when I was, you know, backpacking was that I'd be in a rural environment in Eastern or Southern Africa, and there are all these communities that rely on hand pumps, and more often than not, the hand pumps are broken. And well, why is that? It's because you have a big NGO that's coming in and punching boreholes, but not maintaining them. And the community doesn't have the ability to maintain them because people who get trained then have some practical engineering. Well, they go to the city, right? Like, I mean, there's any number of reasons why hand pumps don't get maintained. And when I was at Gates Foundation, one of the first things I did was invest in the creation of a new accounting system so that you account for the service provided, not for just the capital costs of a hand pump. So that was like a really important thing. But yeah, I mean, I think what I'm saying is a lot of times people say, oh, there's no money, but you actually look at the situation you might find that actually the barrier is a regulatory barrier, or it's actually like a staffing thing, right? And if you could navigate that, then you don't have to sit and wait, which is what most communities have to do, is they wait for that once in a lifetime shot to be included in a World Bank project where they'll get way more money than they ever needed. Something like a ridiculous percentage, I feel like I just read a study about this, and it is a bit ridiculous, gets siphoned off for corruption. So the community doesn't even get it. You know what I mean? And then they don't get money ever again because for the next 50 years because they've had their one shot. And that's the conundrum that we're facing, you know, in this aid environment, or you know, these wealth imbalanced environments where you have donors and recipients. So that's kind of, it's a hard one. So I don't know that answered your question, but just to share a couple of other experiences that led me to that conclusion, that the barriers are often, it's not just financing. If we threw all the money in the world at it, we'd still have problems, I guess, is, you know, it was my conclusion.
Yeah, thank you. I definitely just wanted to hear sort of your perspective and opinion and experience. So thank you.
Yeah, I hope that your experiences are different.
Rachel, as we were talking about the Gates Foundation, I'd love for you to share how you had the vision and got Gates to accept their leadership and their commitment to water and sanitation hygiene and composting toilets. And what was your experience there? What do you think the level of success was or is, and how could that be improved?
Cutting to the chase of the tough questions, Stuart. So that so okay, well, so there's like the inside baseball situation of the Gates Foundation. So I'm just gonna imagine yourself, because imagine yourself at a philanthropy that has way more money than it can spend, and where there is an initial desire by a founder, in this case it was Melinda, to say, you know, every time I go into a community, they say they want water. And, you know, because that's, you know, having safe water, people know that that causes diarrheal disease, right? Unfortunately, treating diarrhea generally is a lot cheaper with a pharmaceutical product than preventing, you know, all of the complexities of providing safe water. So if you're just doing a cost benefit analysis, you're always going to go for the pharmaceutical solution. But anyway, we had lots of conversations with senior leadership at Gates about why can't we just have a vaccine for diarrhea? And us being like, well, that could be a really bad thing. Actually, you don't want to prevent all diarrhea. But anyway, so what we had was, you know, we were a learning initiative when I was hired back in 2007, and we were a learning initiative for several years. And what we were trying to figure out was where would the best fit be between the culture of the Gates Foundation and the problems around water and sanitation. And when we were originally looking at water, we came to a realization fairly quickly that the challenge with water is not technology. The world doesn't need another water filter. I mean, yes, it does, but it really does. That science, there's not really any scientific breakthroughs around water filtration or providing, because the issue is not the water filter, it's how do you actually deliver the water filter to people around the world at a price point that is something they can afford. And so then that's not at the time, the Gates Foundation was still very new and really interested in technological solutions. And so we kind of came to this realization that, well, the water sector is also very crowded with nonprofits. And me personally, this is something that I fought very hard for. I didn't want the Gates Foundation, or at least our team, I didn't want it to just become, okay, well, we're going to fund all of the 22,000 water NGOs that all say 1 billion people lack access to safe water, and I have the solution, because they don't have the solution. They generally are Western, white, privileged people who come to who have access to the Gates Foundation. And so we started looking at sanitation, which was a much less crowded field at the time. And looking at rural, so we did a major grant, a learning grant, to look at community-led total sanitation and to really investigate that model and to see, because there was some really promising results from a few studies, but we weren't sure what that market structure might look like or how it might scale. And then on the other hand, we were looking at urban sanitation and saying, well, what could this look like? Personally, I was very interested in the urban sanitation side because the world is urbanizing. What do you do with all that? You know, like flush toilets are not the solution in many cities. Just, you know, I had one of my grantees whom I love, the CEPT University in India. You know, they did a very powerful study around Mumbai, and they were able to show at the time, India's national policy was waterborne sewerage for everybody. And they were able to show that if everybody in just Mumbai had access to a waterborne toilet, even the low flow type, there would be no water in the Narmada Dam or anywhere else feeding into Mumbai. So you'd basically just flush all the fresh water that they had stored down the drain. And so we started, that kind of was the trigger. You know, we discovered that both were important. We were more excited about the opportunity for technological innovation in the sanitation side than in the water side, as was Bill, who was increasingly, you know, when I started at the Gates Foundation, Bill was not full-time yet. And so Melinda was more full-time and more leading. And then Bill came on board and everybody was like, okay, now we need technological innovations because that will attract his interest. And so sanitation became kind of a good thing to do. And we did some robust evaluations of both the rural side. And then we created this Reinvent the Toilet strategy, which was, you know, how can we get the world off of waterborne sewerage, or at least provide an alternative? I'm giving a very long-winded answer, but where we are now, or where they are now, is, I think, or I would just say, I think that we set the criteria, the performance criteria, too stringent. You know, we wanted it to be something like where people it was, you know, less than 10 cents per deposit or something. We could look up what the original TPPs were, but it's just really expensive, right? It's, you know, and the technology is not super great, to be honest, you know, even 10, now 12 or 15 years in. It's really
Was it
hard
primarily
to have the
composting
user
toilets?
experience of. So
primarily composting, or
so these are the reinvented toilets. So there are different technologies. So there's certainly there's composting, but there's the big bet that the foundation made was on the Janicki system, which is kind of like, imagine a container, like a truck container, and it's a whole, like, basically package treatment plant. And it works in Sedro-Woolley. They've built one in the United States. It's very hard to maintain. They're in operation in Dakar and in Senegal and in a couple of places in China. But they're very expensive. They basically take wastewater and then they treat the water to drinkable standards. And then they create kind of a sludge that they can convert into energy and biochar, basically, or like a treated waste product that can then be used for urban agriculture. And so it's meant to be this sort of in a box package plant that does all of the things that need to be done to sanitation waste. It's expensive. It's requires a higher level of engineering capability and skill set and things than what is, it's an entirely novel thing. They've had a very hard time keeping it running in Senegal. And it's not a commercially viable thing. So I will say one of the reasons why I left the Gates Foundation, and I don't think that the situation has changed all that much, is there's very much this idea, or let's just say that I have a very different understanding or belief system or experience around scaling. I don't believe that if you create a product that it will automatically scale because it's wonderful. My experience is that there are regulatory things. You have to build a market. You actually have to build demand for it. And when you're talking about a public good, demand either is coming from a government, a service authority, which is the regulator. It gets really boring. It's not fun anymore. You have to deal with utilities and regulators and policymakers, not just private companies, and like the private sector suddenly will magically create that market for a public good. And that was not something that the leadership at the foundation back in 2012 was really interested to invest in. They did not want to do market building in that way. They very much had a theory of change, or they bought into a theory of change of, if we build it, the market will come. And I don't think that that has borne out in practice. Because we don't have a
Thanks, Rachel. I
reinvented. Do you have
appreciate
a
actually the level of detail and insight that.
Like, do you have a reinvented toilet? Have you seen them anywhere? I haven't seen them anywhere. You know, that's the challenge.
No, I haven't. Yeah, and yeah, but it's one of the biggest issues relating to water, and it's solvable. We just, as you said, we've got to find a way to scale it and economically make it affordable in the developing world.
Yeah, and where we
Yeah.
live too, I
So
think,
who
you know,
else has a
Hawaii.
question?
Hi, this is West. I work with the group.
Hannah, you have a question?
Pardon me? Oh, yeah. My question is sort of a comment that's based on my work, and this idea that technology, as that improves, that's really the answer. In working in Latin America, I found that that's not necessarily it. Not that there aren't technological advancements that would be helpful, but in some ways, I think we have all the technology that we need, and it's more of an appropriate applicability, as you talked about, and overcoming sort of ingrained, sometimes cultural, but sometimes regional perceptions of water and sanitation itself that become difficult. Just the things that people have learned and been sort of indoctrinated in can become a hurdle that one wouldn't expect. And I was wondering if you could comment on that from your work.
Yeah, so one of the things, and I'll even take it back to the video, right? So one of the things, if I had a mission with this STAR program, it's to basically create the space for professionals, right? You know, professionals working in different contexts to consider problems from different angles, right? And create the space particularly in environments where the education system is very hierarchical and very much like there's a right answer and there's a wrong answer, and it's very binary, into like more critical thinking and questioning, right? So is this a problem that I can solve? So a lot of the times in the water sector too, it's, oh, there's a problem, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm in the right like lane to be able to solve it. Like, I'm not going to be able to solve for governance in Africa, right? Like, even if I want to resolve a governance, like that's not my lane, right? My lane is I'm a Western trained economist who like can work with funders, right? Like, so there's something about being very specific about the problems. I think what continues to fascinate me and what I'm very excited for in the water sector actually is business models, and not business models. I'll use the word business kind of broadly, because I think it relates to public as well as private, because you have a technology, but there's the who, what, when, where, how, and why around, like, who makes that, right? What's the supply chain for it? Or what's the distribution model? Or who's actually the customer? And how do we think about, you know, coupling or uncoupling? Or, you know, it's like a jigsaw puzzle, or that's the wrong analogy. It's like there's so many opportunities to play with business models if you can make the costs explicit, because then you can start talking reasonably about what level of subsidy is going to be required and what that subsidy is for. Or what level of risk would be required, and then what an appropriate return might be if for a private investor. And so I love that space around these delivery models, whether it's for bulk water, you know, water for irrigation or whatever. You know, I think about in Latin America, for example, these water funds, the water funds that the Nature Conservancy pioneered, where you have a conservation model such that the downstream users kind of pay the upstream users to not pollute or exploit the water in exchange. So then it's basically so cities can pay farmers to be more efficient in their water use so that there is more of a reliable supply in the cities, and there are these just interesting partnerships and funding mechanisms that are emerging, I think out of necessity, but also because in the water sector, at least like in my career path, there was this hope that, oh, there'll be a silver bullet technology, or, oh, there'll be a silver bullet somehow, right? We'll do whatever. And we're finding that that's not true. And, even the most successful social enterprises, they're not scaling, they're not actually scaling. It's great that Sanergy serves like what they have 400 units now, and I commend them because I think 400 units for Sanergy is that many thousands of people with sanitation, but that's not a scaled model, and it's highly, highly, highly subsidized by grants and Western philanthropy. It's not, so it's like we accept things as we are, but we innovate around like how things get done. That's an exciting space, I think. I don't know if that answers your question, but those are my thoughts about it.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, interesting.
So I just want to read Hannah. So I apologize because there's some noise where I am, but my question is, many of us water emissaries are students in biology and environmental science fields. And in my own personal experience, I've taken very few classes in business and finance.
Question
Would you recommend we
in the
take part? Yeah, so I'm reading it. So would you recommend we take part in those kinds of classes to help improve our ability to work with organizations, nonprofits, et cetera? So I hate to be the kind of person who's like, take business school classes. But I do think that financial literacy is a really good thing. And I'm going to tell you why for a couple of reasons. One, if you are in the biology or environmental science fields, whether you go toward academia or you go to working with government or working with nonprofits, you're going to have to write grant proposals. And you're going to have to court relationships and do marketing, whether that's marketing of yourself or marketing of your organization. So understanding some of those basics gets you ahead of the curve already. The other thing, and then, so, do you need to become like a business specialist? No. But being able to speak so much of like with the STAR program, what we trained, what we were offering was a language. And it's a language that is effectively strategy consulting. And it's a language now that is being kind of spread in these 5 countries in sub-Saharan Africa, right? And it's new. It was actually very new for lean thinking has been around, maybe, I don't know, like lean thinking is kind of very 80s, among like, oh, lean thinking is like, isn't that thinking from the 80s? Like, that's not novel, but it's very novel in these contexts, right? And very useful for people to think about who's your customer or who's your client, what might they need, what might they value. So yeah, I do think that taking a couple of classes could be really useful. I also think, and sorry, just I can go on, like, one of the biggest markets in terms of funding is like either ESG, so the environmental social governance in terms of impact investing. So taking an accounting class, I know it's like boring as all hell, but accounting is actually a really useful thing because you can learn it and then you can say this actually, there's actually a book that I highly recommend everybody read. Hang on. You don't even need to take an accounting class. Just read the history of accounting. There's a book that is the most, what's the name? Hang on. I read it. It's called Double Entry, I believe. Yeah, Double Entry. This book is brilliant because it will also tell you about the importance of accounting and why accounting fails us and why accounting might actually be sort of the bane of environmental and social justice issues. And it's a super pleasant read. It's a super interesting read. So yeah, so I do think that being able to speak to people who have business and finance backgrounds is very helpful. And Stuart, actually, I feel like Stuart, you come from a very much more intensive investment background than me. What do you think?
I completely agree with you. Yeah, to have, as you said, financial literacy is critical because it's whether you are a for-profit, a social venture, or a nonprofit, or if you're just looking to have your own career, to be able to have your own skills in business and finance is really valuable. As you said, accounting is the foundation. I think that nothing replaces experience, of course. And so as we all find out, once you get involved in whatever activities you're doing, you learn more by doing it, more on the job than you probably will ever learn in school or even from books. But having that as a foundation, I think, is extremely valuable. Who else has a question? I've got many of them if you all don't speak up, so I don't want to dominate the time here. Ganji, you have a question?
I don't know if it's relevant or not, but like, have you ever come across like the economic aspects of like virtual water footprint? And if you have, like, does it affect like the availability of water and the economic aspects? I'm not sure if you understand what I'm trying to ask.
Do you mean the Tony Allen's work? Tony Allen's work around the virtual water and water trading? Yeah. So I find that work to be super fascinating, particularly when we look at. I think that the economics of virtual water is useful, but only when we kind of look at what is renewable water and what is fixed water supply in the context of climate change. So it's really interesting. I was asked to give feedback on an article today. So it's kind of a little bit different, but I was asked to give feedback today on an article, a news article that somebody's writing about Arizona. And in it, because we're looking to see what to do with it. And in it, the author says something along the lines of, well, in Arizona, a lot of officials are saying that the solution to Arizona's water security problem, which is dire, don't move to, are any of you from Arizona? Don't move to Arizona. But is that, the tribes, the Native American tribes recently, like in the last 10 years, finally won rights to water that they had like lost because of treaties that weren't right, whatever. And so state officials are like, well, we would solve our water problems if the tribes would lease or sell us their water rights. And, I kind of am like, seriously, guys, like, so first is, and my sort of like, we need to have a convening around this. I think this would be a fascinating topic, is because on the one hand, just because the Native American tribes have 1.9 million acre feet or whatever, right, combined of Arizona's water, doesn't mean that that's just on paper. The Colorado is kind of running dry right now. We're in a long-term, so your denominator is shifting, even if on paper it says that you have this right. So then you're going to sell that, like, and maybe they will, and more power to them, but you can only imagine state officials then wringing their hands and saying, oh, but these Native American tribes are they're way charging us way too much for these water rights. Like, you can just see it happening, right? It's like a farce. So I do think that there's this piece about sustainability. And I think that Tony Allen's work has been very informative. So basically what it says is, like, there are some countries, just for people who aren't familiar with it, that there, you basically can look at the balance of trade between countries and say, well, how much water is embodied in the creation of your jackets, or, your or whatever, any product, crops and things like that. And then how much are you importing versus exporting as an indicator of how self-reliant you might be. And I think it's an important and interesting indicator, and it's an important and interesting area of study. I think that, but taking it one step forward is, if all of your water supply, if you are trading away your renewable water, or your like fossil water, that doesn't come back. So, the pricing that you might get is, and we don't see that yet in terms of water pricing, where fossil water is being charged at a higher rate than renewable water, in part because we just don't measure well. So I don't know if that, I'd love to hear more if you want to type in the chat of like what you're studying and what is inspiring to you around that. And you might want to look, I posted a link to Josh's water jobs, which some of you, I don't know if any of you are aware of it, but Josh is this really cool guy who just decided like 15 years ago or 10 years ago, he just was gonna kind of send a newsletter around of all the jobs he could hear of. And eventually he got a little bit of capital to do this as a website, but it's incredible. It's an incredible resource so that you can look, and just every week he sends out an update where you can see who's hiring in the water space, which as students, you might want to kind of look an eye and see like, what is the balance of private sector or public sector agencies? What are the kinds of jobs that you might be interested in? And he organizes it by, 0 to 5 years, 5 to 10 years, 10. So you can kind of look and see what's the spectrum of entry and mid-range and other kinds of jobs as you think about a career path in this space. And it's really kind of cool that that this exists, because when I started, like, nobody was hired. Like, I don't know. I mean, it was very much a feel around in the dark and find a career.
I just wanted to add that I do a fair amount of work with water footprints, and I think you laid it out nicely. That's one of the things that it shows very well that, that growing cotton on groundwater in a desert is ridiculous, because not only does it use all the water, but that water is so much more valuable for other things. Yeah, and I think the other thing that can be gleaned from water footprints is better ways to conserve water. And some of the ways that we think are the best for conserving water, at the tap and things like that, may not be at all. It may have to do with agriculture. It may have to do with even the kind of foods that we choose to consume in whatever amounts. So, but that was an interesting example.
Sorry, just sharing another guilty pleasure of a book. It's called The Water Knife, which is about Arizona. It's when Nevada declares war on Arizona, and it's like a thriller, like a John Clancy novel or something. So if you haven't read it, it's a afternoon read. You could read it in an afternoon. Don't buy it. It's like totally get it. It's not that good, but like it's interesting, fun read.
That's great.
I
Hey,
have
Rachel.
a question related
Good.
to what you said earlier about how, like, obviously we do need more technology in the water space, and we need to keep working on that, but how so many issues related to water have to do with connecting people and providing them with other resources. And I think that's something that we're especially realizing as sort of Gen Z goes out into the world, into the workforce. Obviously this is a bit of a loaded question, but can you think of like the best ways to communicate, or what have you seen that are ways to effectively communicate that with people? Because I think at first glance, there's so much conversation around like, what can we do to solve our water problems? And everything is focused on how can we fix this with a new invention, or what are we going to make that can solve this, without really looking at what we already have and sort of using what we have and fixing the problems that we've sort of created for ourselves.
Okay, so I have like a real bummer of a response, and then I have like the things, like something that kind of why I get excited. And so one of the things, so let me just say as a precursor that I feel really fortunate that when I decided I wanted to work on water, and not, although I really regret not becoming a water lawyer, because I really think that I would have been a good one and it would have been fun, but that aside, couldn't afford to pay for law school, damn it. But anyway, that aside, the thing that I think is that water is always changing. So like I am always learning, and I love that about this space. I totally love the water sector, that I'm always challenged. So right when I think I'm a know-it-all and I'm like, I got that, like I don't, so it's actually quite cool, because it is so messy. So on the one hand, a friend of mine who I used to work with at ERM is a PFAS expert, right? So are you guys familiar with PFAS? I'll Google also PFAS. It's a nefarious, awful, thing that's like everywhere. PFAS chemicals, and she remediates PFAS. And I said, well, when you remediate them, I had her over a couple of weeks ago, and I was like, well, when you remediate PFAS, where does it go? And she said, well, it goes from the water into the ground or the air and then back again, but we just we move it, but you can't actually get rid of it. So. And it's everywhere, and it's everywhere. It's in like the rain in Antarctica. Like this PFAS is awful. And there are a number of, and PFAS is just the chemical we're testing. Now, who knows what other awful chemicals we are. So if you're going to go into chemicals in terms of technology, I think that there's probably a lot of interesting innovation to be had around chemical remediation and elimination, right? Like we have to figure this out. I have no idea who's funding that though, until it becomes a massive human health like emergency. I don't know who is actually paying for remediation, because even now, like, you know, my well, I have a well and we check for E. coli, like we're not checking for industrial chemicals. So, because it's too expensive, right? It's not regulated. Okay, but that's one thing aside. The thing that I get really excited about with water in terms of, and particularly I think for Gen Z, is actually this interface of crypto and water and economics. So one of the things that I've been trying to get funding for, failing, but I'm not giving up, is I really think there's a space in virtual communities to test and simulate and figure out governance structures and contracts, right? That change the game so that you don't, and that basically we can move from an extractive economics into a regenerative economics, and that we figure it out. So there are little seeds, right, with donut economics and circular economy and whatnot. But I think there's a space in here for blockchain and other types of technology that are super interesting, because you can automate certain things, you can simulate and really see how things play out in short periods of time rather than the time frames of human things. And you can really disrupt the hierarchies, at least in the virtual space. The big question is whether or not how you kind of translate that into the real world space. But I think that that's the frontier. And I think, so that is, yeah, no, thank you, Christina, for joining. So I feel like, you know, in addition, take a computer science class, you know what I mean? Or take a blockchain 101 class to round out your education as you're thinking this through, or find something online and learn about it, because there are a lot of jobs in that space. And I feel like that's the frontier. And I would look to Stuart and maybe others on the call of like what you're seeing and what you're inspired by. But that's, if I was starting my career, if I had to like go back and do history and anthropology, I would for sure have computer science in there and learning how to do modeling and testing.
Rachel, that's so spot on. And you and I haven't spoken about this yet, but thank you for leading into this, where we are working on creating a water token that will be structured as a DAO, and creating community and governance all relating to water, and starting with probably creating water NFTs.
Right. And so the big question is like, right, so how do you create that DAO? Hang on just 1 second. Yeah, just 1 second. Sorry, we're having a little bit of a technology meltdown here. So I think the big thing is like, how do you create an NFT or a DAO where, where basically you sorry, hang on a second.
Stuart, maybe you could explain a bit more about defining the terminology for that for people that don't have as much experience in the cryptocurrency space. I know as an environmental science student, I'm not super familiar with necessarily what all of that means. I think it could probably be beneficial for other people to understand sort of the non-technological definitions of what you're doing. If you heard me.
I did. Hold on just a second.
Okay.
I'm just at the airport, just checking in. So hold on just a second. I will get to you with this one.
I'll cut in and then Stuart can correct me.
Perfect.
But so a lot of times, blockchain is this idea, right? And you know, Bitcoin was the first sort of blockchain thing, but blockchain is just this idea that it's a ledger. So when I said study accounting, I wasn't kidding, right? But blockchain is basically makes accounting, it sort of almost could be, I think with innovations to blockchain, it could kind of counter some of the challenges that double entry accounting has. Because with double entry accounting, the thing with accounting is, you kind of are like, is this a cost, or is this like, is this an asset, a liability? Is this a cost? Is it a income? Like, there's the accounting is interesting because not a whole stuff, not everything is fixed, and something is, a lot is subject to interpretation. Hang on. My daughter is having a serious meltdown, so hang on one second.
We'll just wait a moment for everyone to get settled and then restart the conversation. Absolutely hope that's so true. There's actually, I was reading an article a couple weeks ago about how much labor women contribute to the global economy in raising children, and how it just, I mean, most women obviously aren't paid for doing things like raising kids and taking care of a house and stuff like that, but it's like absolutely absurd contributions to the global economy for everything that they do. So it absolutely is a superpower.
Thank you. It's basically like, my daughter, I think it's, she's probably hungry because it's like dinner time, you know, and yeah, but she's lost it. She's 8 and she's lost it. So here we are. So hang on. I'm really, really sorry. It's like, I can't be embarrassed because this is the challenge of being a mother in the 21st century with 2 years of COVID, but hold on just one more second.
No problem. I can fill the gap here.
Awesome.
As Rachel said, the blockchain, if you all aren't familiar with it, yes, it's the #1 thing for you to become familiar with, because it is the new form of technology that will be creating applications and services for everything that we occur in our life, from financial transactions to looking at keeping track of you know, whatever, whether it's security codes or keys or your bank account, to the whole new world of what's called NFTs, non-fungible tokens, which all have started as art, but it's just, art is just a precursor to this. It's any type of content whatsoever. It could be podcasts and videos and authors and everything that will become non-fungible tokens. And then the DAO, D-A-O, is distributed autonomous organizations. And this is a new form of structure where today you can set up an NGO, or you can set up a nonprofit, or you can set up a C Corp, or a sub-S, or an LLC, or a partnership. Those are all structures of businesses. And the DAO is the new form of structure that is a structure that is what I'll call open source. And it has governance where all of the members, which could be anybody, instead of just the board of directors or the founders, or your, you know, I'll call it your insiders, all have decision-making and vote for decisions that occur in your platform organization that is a DAO. And everyone has a say and everyone participates as an involved. And what's part of this is creating either a coin or a token. And so I'm sure you all have heard of Bitcoin and Ethereum and many of these other altcoins that are there. So we are in the midst of creating a water token and a water DAO that will enable you and everyone else on this planet to be part of this, to have a water token, to have ownership in it, and to be able to be part of what we're creating for this water DAO, where we're going to be starting with primarily social venture nonprofit funding for water and sanitation hygiene projects around the globe. And then we will be creating NFTs relating to artists, creating water, ocean, all types of art relating to everything about water. And also looking at being able to, as I think Rachel was sort of inferring, looking at sources of water all over the planet and being able to create NFTs for those and valuing those, protecting those. And then we'll provide funding for innovations from entrepreneurs like yourself that are going to be creating the future water solutions and innovations. So I hope that gives you something to drink on and taste. Rachel, did you hear some of that? No, she's still distracted.
So I'm sorry. I'm in the middle of a temper tantrum.
Okay.
And
if you need to go, Rachel.
I'm really interested. I really probably should, just for the sake of, because I'm now getting soil thrown at me because daughter doesn't know how to respect boundaries today. But I think that all sounds really exciting, Stuart. And, you know, I'm actually going to send you a proposal that we just found out last week that we didn't win, around some of these questions about how do you make NFTs and DAOs, because again, this is a frontier. So, you know, all of this stuff is very, very new. And so there's a serious risk, there's a significant risk that all of these blockchain innovations are just going to mirror all of the exploitative practices of the current economic model. And yet there's an opportunity to experiment and do things differently. And that's where I think there's just a lot of opportunity for innovation. That being said, I have my daughter's this is absolutely atrocious behavior that I actually have never experienced before. And so I'm going to go. So I really appreciate your time and patience. Be careful with your children. I don't know what else to say, but I'm going to go because I think I need to save some plants at the moment. So thank you so very much. And I'm happy to answer any other questions and be in touch by email.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Have a great night.
Thanks. Bye.